Morning, everyone. There he is. Morning, everyone. Happy Sunburn Day. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Political Editor, Mr. Ben Glaze.
Hello, good morning.
We're going to take you through the biggest stories of today. Through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. So get into the comments and tell us what you think about the biggest stories. And we can't answer them all, but we will answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the fact that yesterday the UK recorded 0 COVID deaths for the first time since March 2020. That's been on the cards, with Monday death rates getting progressively lower because of reporting delays over the weekends. And of course, with the bank holiday, it's been even slower. But Ben, this is your story. You've got the front page, so you've got the responsibility for explaining it to us. Is it likely there really were 0 COVID deaths yesterday?
Now, you're right to be cautious about the bank holiday reporting because when we do the stats normally on a Tuesday, there's a slight rise compared with the previous days because there are time lags over the weekend because the reporting just doesn't happen as quickly. Obviously, with the bank holiday being on the Monday, that knocks it out by a day. So it's entirely possible we'll see a disproportionate rise in the number reported today. That doesn't mean that more people will have died yesterday. It's all to do with the reporting. Even if in the shakedown, we find out that it wasn't actually 0 deaths within that 24-hour period, it does mean that deaths are coming down, because even if in that window there weren't actually the 0 that were reported yesterday because of those various time lags, there is an undeniable trend that the deaths are much, much lower than they have been for months. They've been steadily falling, but this figure that's come out and is covered not just by the Mirror but most other papers on the front page today, because it is good news. It's about the trend. Now, there are spike days when things go up and there are days when they go down, but every scientist, epidemiologist, expert involved in this pandemic will tell you you've got to look at the trends, and the trends are that the numbers are down and they are staying low, and that is undeniably good news for all of us.
Yeah, and so if the trend is generally coming down and they're talking about having broken the link between infections and deaths, there are still, there's never been 0 deaths. Even last summer, there was never a day when there were 0 COVID deaths, when things were low last summer. But we do still have more than 3,000 infections a day because of this new strain that's going around. So does this mean what we would all like it to mean, which is that, for Britain, at least, the pandemic is over?
It doesn't mean that, unfortunately. As you said, those case numbers are rising. About 3/4 of them, we understand, are cases from the Indian variant, which is certainly more transmissible. Scientists are looking at the data to work out exactly how much more transmissible it is. It could be anything from 20% to slightly over 50%, we are told. So, no, it doesn't mean the pandemic's over at all. If anything, the case numbers are getting worse. But the death numbers aren't getting worse, and even the serious illnesses in hospital are not getting worse. Now, the reason for that is the vaccinations. When the government announced its priority list for vaccinations after accepting recommendations from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, there's a bit of disquiet among some people about who should be getting vaccines when, but they went through in age groups, potential exposure to the virus in terms of NHS frontline and care workers, and the clinically vulnerable. And as someone, I got it early because I've got asthma. So I've actually I've had my 2 jabs and are being fully protected for probably over 6 weeks now, maybe a bit longer than that. So if I was to get corona, I wouldn't get seriously ill, so the theory goes. And you can see with these numbers, throughout the last 15 months, the people who've been dying are very seriously ill, with people who had underlying health conditions and the old and the very old. Those are the ones who vaccinated first. The death numbers have started coming down. So it does seem that the vaccinations are working.
Right, that's good to know. Now, Christopher says, we'll never get out of lockdown. If you look at all the people on the beaches, what's the point of social distances? As far as I'm aware, Christopher, and I think Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance have been asked about this, they have been totally unable to find any signs of an outbreak linked to beaches or linked to the BLM protests. So, and the marching and so on and so forth that's happened over last summer. So going to the beach does seem comparatively safe. You're probably not going to catch it just for being next to somebody on the beach, roughly, vaguely, we think. So people on the beaches isn't the reason we're not getting out of lockdown, so far as we know at the moment. But part of the reason we might not be getting out of lockdown is that there are 7 billion people on the planet, and about 1 billion of them might be vaccinated by the end of this year, mostly in the wealthier parts of the world. Now, Boris Johnson, a bit on the bottom of page 4, in which Boris Johnson's been urged to give the vaccines we have over-ordered significantly by hundreds of millions to poor parts of the world, down the bottom left corner there, to stop the rise of new variants, which, of course, you only need one to get around the vaccine, and we've got real problems. Now, Boris Johnson's or government's response there is we've given 62 million doses to 120 countries, which sounds like a lot until you divide it up and work out that it's 516,000 doses per country, which is not anywhere near enough for any single country in the world, I think, apart from possibly Gibraltar. So it's just not good enough, is it, Ben? We are, I suppose, in theory, still open to new variants coming in and causing us lockdown problems until everyone's vaccinated. Am I right?
That is right, yeah. So this was a letter, an open letter, published in, I think it was about half a dozen different newspapers across the world yesterday, from the leaders of the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, and I think also the World Bank. And what they were saying was that richer nations, like the UK, we're the 5th richest nation in the world, we should give more vaccines to those poorer nations, because it's all very well if high levels of inoculation and immunity in the United Kingdom, but the moment we start going abroad, if we mix with people in other countries where there's considerably less immunity, or allow people from other countries with less immunity to come to the UK, then we're massively exposed again. And this is, this has been an issue that really under the spotlight at the moment because of the Indian variant. I wrote a couple of weeks ago about how we were still having 4 or 5 flights a day landing from India, even though India's on the red list. So people are still coming in from India and potentially bringing a variant. Now, the government will say, there's strict quarantine. You have to go to a government-approved hotel for 10 nights. You have to pay £1,750.
We've got a Thai variant now. We've already had South Africa variants. They're coming in from countries that aren't on the list yet, or even are on the list, but they're not of a variant of concern yet. They get in, and then they cause problems, and then suddenly they become a concern 3 weeks later, and it's all too late then, isn't it? Exactly.
So if the controls are as strict as the government makes out, and if the quarantine system works as well, how has this happened then with the 3/4 of the infections being of the Indian variant? Because somebody clearly brought it into the country and then spread it. So clearly there was a failure within that system. I just want to go back as well to, you mentioned, I think it was Chris on the message, mentioned about the beaches. Chris Whitty, and I think you referenced it, Susie, he has said that no infections can be linked to those scenes we saw last summer of very busy beaches. And as a result, a lot of people couldn't go abroad or didn't feel safe going abroad, so they went to their local beach, and there were pictures showing those beaches being quite full and busy. There's one thing we should bear in mind here as well. There's a way of taking a picture that, camera never lies, but it can show you different angles. So some of the pictures were taken at a sort of horizontal level, where it looks like they're densely packed. There was one picture I saw, a photographer friend showed me a picture he took at eye level, which made a particular beach on the south coast look very busy, and then a drone shot of exactly the same beach at exactly the same time, where people are spaced out. They were 2 meters apart. So I think social distancing is going on beaches anyway, even if some of the camera angles don't make it look like that. And also, we're told one of the things we have learned during this pandemic over the past 50 months is that fresh air is good for you. Being outdoors doesn't, that is much, much safer than being indoors. So if people are using this good weather, and you can see from my face, I've been using this good weather to get out and about and enjoy yourselves in the fresh air. It is safe.
Exactly, and vitamin D from sunshine, which boosts your immune system. So get out there and enjoy the sunshine. Now, Julie, good morning, Julie. What about deaths from vaccines? And an emoji of a syringe. Ooh, well, the death rate from vaccines, I'm reliably informed by the internet, is the risk of a blood clot from AstraZeneca jab is 0.0001%, or about 58 people in 35 million. So you'd have maybe about 100 people at risk of blood clots in the UK. And of course, your body can break down those blood clots. It's possible you can get treatment for those blood clots and be absolutely fine and not die from them. So that's just the risk of a clot. It's not the risk of death. And you have about a 1 in 100 chance of having problems with COVID. So overall, COVID as well causes death by blood clots, little tiny blood clots all over your lungs and in your extremities and in your organs, in your brain, in your kidneys and places like that. So get your vaccine, because the risk of a clot from that is significantly less than a risk of a clot from the jab. Now, Tanya says, I took both vaccines. Do I still wear a mask? Yes, you have to, according to the law, Tanya. But I was having a half-term trip to a stately home with a small child yesterday, right, Ben? And we had to wear, going around the gardens was fine. We had to put a vaccine on in order to go into the house. And we were in this huge baronial hall, right, where we were the only people and a guide, and we still had to wear our masks because it was indoors. But it was an echoing, medieval chamber. There was no risk, even if someone had sneezed in there, there's no risk of our getting COVID from them, because it just immediately be dispersed. How long are we going to have to be wearing the masks indoors? Some of us want to wear them on public transport and stuff the rest of our days, which is fair enough. I think I will. But in buildings, in shops, in some buildings and not in others, how long do we have to keep wearing them?
There's a social distancing review, which includes masks, going on at the moment by the Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove, which is due to report on in the run-up to June the 21st, which of course is the penciled-in date for stage 4 of the government's roadmap for unlocking. I think it's quite likely that the government might say, please keep wearing your masks indoors when you're in the pub or the restaurant, you get up to go to the loo, or when you walk in before you sit down. I think they'll say that, and I think probably also on public transport. It's interesting you say about when you went to this National Trust property, Susie, because over the bank holiday weekend, my wife and I, we were in Hampshire for a few days, and yeah, we were out and about, and then on one of our walks there was a village church, and we always like to go into village churches, have a look. It's rare that they're open these days, but this one was. And when we go in, and it was, it's village church, not massive, but it was reasonably big, and it was empty, and yet we still put our masks on because the sign on the door said, please wear your masks. We still hand sanitized. Again, no risk really of getting corona in there, but that was something that A, we've become used to doing, and B, we were asked to do it. Now, if the church caretaker or the priest walked in and had seen us wandering around the church without a mask, they'd have had a reasonable question, say, why are you in church? It says please wear your mask, why aren't you doing them? So I think we have got used to it over the past year or so. And I think some people, even when they no longer have to legally wear their masks on public transport, I think quite a lot of people might still want to. And yeah, I think when that review reports in the run up to June 21st, I suspect we'll be asked to keep wearing our masks for a while longer, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's socially unacceptable. If you've been seen in the church without a mask, you'd have felt embarrassed and socially unacceptable to whoever it was that you were around. And that's probably why you did it, rather than any fear of genuinely being caught out or breaking a law or something. It's like drunk driving or not wearing a seatbelt. Kind of don't want to do it. Now, one quick question before we move on to the next story. About this restrictions will be lifted on June the 21st, because your piece, Ben, on page 4 and 5, you've basically written the paper tomorrow. Well done for doing that on the day of bank holiday with sunburn. It says very clearly that while the politicians want to do it, the experts don't want to lift the restrictions straight away. So you've got in your story the Joint Centre for Vaccination and Immunisation, the British Thoracic Society, the New and Emerging Respiratory Threats Advisory Group, the British Medical Association, the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, all saying, not sure. That is quite the lineup, really, of experts against a consistently quite bad newspaper columnist.
That's right. There are a growing number of experts who are being wary in the run-up to this planned unlocking on June the 21st, and they're becoming more vocal about it because they're looking at the number of infections, and some of them are saying that not enough people are vaccinated yet. Obviously, the longer we delay the unlocking, as long as the vaccination programme continues at the same rate that it has been, more people will be vaccinated. So when you do eventually trigger stage 4, more people will be protected because of the vaccinations. So it's going to be a tricky one for Boris Johnson. They're looking at data this week and next week, and then they're going to decide whether or not to go ahead with the June 21st step 4. Previously, the Prime Minister has said he wants the unlocking to be cautious but irreversible. What he really, really doesn't want to do is trigger step 4, see a massive surge in infections, which puts the NHS under pressure once again, and then have to row back, because that would be embarrassing politically, bad for the economy, and it might actually start to harm him in the opinion polls, where not a lot of damage has been done so far.
Yeah, well, he's done that 2 or 3 times already and seems to have got away with it. But it's, how many times can you mention the war? So we'll have to just see how that one works out, perhaps. I think my bet would be on maybe leaving it a week or 2 and then having full freedom, and just he's going to have to ride it out, I think, perhaps, because there are millions of people who haven't been vaccinated yet, even if they are younger and at lower risk, they haven't been vaccinated. And there are some people who've had the vaccines and are still going to have some hospitalisation, even if their chances of death are lower. And of course, the NHS is in such a state after 10 years of austerity that even the tiniest sniffle is going to cause it a problem. We don't want the NHS to collapse. So let's talk to the next story now. And even if you think the pandemic is over for you, it's going to drag on for years for school pupils. Now, the government appointed a catch-up czar. They like a czar. They appointed a czar to find out the best way to produce a report to help children get over the lost school time in the past year. Now, he suggested a £15 billion plan involving putting an extra half hour in the school day to catch up perhaps 100 extra hours over the course of a year. That would amount to. And the amount of money they've just announced that they are going to spend of that 15 billion is, drumroll, 1.4 billion. So not very much. But Ben, what are they going to get for that sort of money?
The government seems to think that the solution to this is in tutoring. They're going to give money to a scheme to help people, to help children with extra tuition. But what they're not doing is extending the school day. Now, there's been this big row been going on between the Department for Education and the Treasury. Rishi Sunak, obviously, said he will do whatever it takes in this crisis. When it comes to funding the catch-up plan that the Department for Education, particularly the catch-up czar, so Kevin Collins, put forward, he's not doing whatever it takes. Like I said, he's only offering a tenth of the money. Now, it's a bit technical, some of this, because this 1.4 billion, it's not nothing. It will do some good work. Children will benefit from it. But it's a tenth of what was planned or what's been asked for. And the government has, they're spending money like water, but they're not doing it for the education of the children. Instead, they're going to make a decision as part of the spending review, it sounds like, which is going to come in autumn, and we'll see cuts to various unprotected Whitehall departments. So the ones that, there are a certain number of ministries that you can't touch their budgets because it's written into law. Or the government has said they won't anyway because it's politically unpalatable. But then there are others where they will cut the budgets. Now, it remains to be seen how much they manage to cut from other departments, basically, to how much is left over so they can put into this plan. So I don't think it'll be anything like the 15 billion that Kevin Collins and the Department for Education want. It will be more than the 1.4 billion announced today. But I feel quite strongly about this because the damage that has been done to children over the past 15 months, shutting them away from school, some parents will be able to have sat at home, they'll have multiple computers and internet devices, and the parents themselves will be well educated and be able to help their children do work. They may have even benefited from not being in school, some of them. But then there are others who won't have had any education time away from school. They're the ones who rely on school, not just for learning, but for seeing their mates, some of them for even just for positive adult influences. So the harm that's been caused to children over the past 15 months, I think we're going to see the impact and the problems of that for years to come. I genuinely mean that. And if it is a problem that can not be solved, but at least alleviated by throwing money at it, I think you should find the money to do that.
Yeah, it would appear to make sense, because it will save money in the long run. If you have future problems with low educational attainment or poverty or crime or anything else, it would have been alleviated, and it would be cheaper to try and fix it at this point. Now, keep asking us your questions, everybody, whether it's about whether the pandemic is over and the 0 deaths that we've just recorded, whether it's about what schools should be doing. They have going to post a vaccine fact check in the comments, because I'm aware that there are some people going on about vaccines in there and talking rubbish. So there will be a fact check in there. Please go and have a look at that, because that will be the truth that can be verified. Now, Steph says the curriculum needs a massive overhaul anyway. They should plan money into that and start teaching our children relevant subjects for this day and age. Now, interestingly about the curriculum, I don't know if this is quite right, Ben, but as far as I'm aware, the national curriculum is just sort of guidance. Teachers don't have to follow it. It's advice. So you put something into the curriculum about, for example, you should be teaching Black cultural history, and schools can ignore it if they want to and teach something else in their lessons. It's not, we all think that the national curriculum should be, the law. You have to teach this, and they don't. Is that right?
As I understand it, there are certain things that you have to teach, and then there are others that's a sort of pick and mix guide, as I understand it. Yeah. There are certain subjects that you have to have a minimum level of teaching in, and there's also sort of certain rules around how long a school day must last, in terms of, it's more to do with the number of sessions that a school must give of education, and a session is defined as lasting a certain period. And obviously a session, if you want to do it all as half days, including like Saturdays and Sundays, you can, because a session is half a day. So I think there are rules around that. There are rules around parts of the national curriculum, but there is also scope for schools and heads to teach other things, as far as I know.
Yeah, so it's kind of down to the school's Ofsted report and how much they feel like doing, to some extent, with the money they get, and they don't all get the right kind of money. Now, Helen says, good morning, Helen, they cut back on all support staff who the children needed. This probably did happen in some schools, because there was some problem, wasn't there, Ben, with the COVID funding and how they could make the schools COVID ready to reopen. And they got some money out, but a lot of schools were told it had to come out of their existing budget. And that meant other things had to be cut in order to meet COVID requirements. So schools have had a really rough end of this all the way through, haven't they?
When schools went back, a lot of head teachers and unions particularly were saying about the extra costs imposed on school, because they had to do things like, set up temporary classrooms in order to have extra space so kids weren't sat side by side, so to enforce social distancing. You also had to provide hand sanitizer. Obviously, the tests were provided by the government, but there's lots of testing. You have to switch some teachers to do testing, or bring in other people who can do that. A lot of schools didn't want to be held responsible for kids getting infected, and in a very small minority of cases that they might have gone on to die, those children, if they become infected in schools. Although I should stress that would have been a very, very small minority. So they took very seriously their responsibilities in terms of enforcing social distancing and measures around minimising the risk of infection from coronavirus. But that did impose costs, and some schools, some unions have said that has not been fully funded. The cash from the government has been insufficient. Right,
now, so it looks like then Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, has lost a fight here with Rishi Sunak. There he is. Another big boy in the playground's taking all his money away. And in fact, that's happened repeatedly throughout the pandemic. So, That would usually indicate who the bully was here, wouldn't we? We'd think. Now, there's one thing we've got Jeff Barton from the Association of School and College Leaders who's written for the Mirror today in a piece against this story. And there's one bit right at the end that he signs off with, which is worth repeating. And he says, the result of all this is a plan which is depressingly but predictably lacking in ambition. Classic school report terminology from a teacher there saying lacking in ambition, which basically means you've achieved nothing and you're going to achieve nothing in the rest of your life. So as school reports go, that's pretty damning. Is the government lacking ambition for the sake of children? Is there just no votes in it, or has it really genuinely run out of money?
Well, we ran out of money a long time ago.
What's the big stop, though? Billions of pounds,
£380 billion, I think, is the cost. So I don't think that's the issue. It's where you choose to spend the money, or you're borrowing. There are certainly votes in it. The problem is the money that you put into education, you don't see the results of it for years, and often the results of it are intangible anyway. Of course, you can see improved results in exam results, but what you don't see is, or at least you don't immediately link, is like the falls in crime or dependency on welfare. Those things take a long, long time to filter through. So you have to be prepared. Essentially, if you're a government and you're going to put money into education, you have to be prepared that you won't get the credit for it. Whoever's in power in 10 years might get the credit for it. So if you're going to be in office for 10 years, then it's you can see it as a long-term investment if you want to do it purely for political purposes rather than the altruistic good of the nation.
It's actually the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
but you won't necessarily get the credit for it. You see it in other things, like Boris Johnson a weekend before last was pictured on the deck of the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. Well, that took more than 10 years to build. He's the one who gets to stand on it and have the pictures taken as it sails off for his first operational deployment. It was actually ordered more than 10 years ago. I remember in 2016, about a week after it was 2 weeks after the Brexit referendum, and after the 2015 Tory election victory, David Cameron had decided he was going to commandeer an RAF Voyager as Cam Force One, prime ministerial plane, give it a makeover, because he thought he was going to be in power for like another 6-7 years and to be jetting around the world on it. And it took about a year to do the makeover for the plane. And he only ever got to fly in it once, and that was for a return trip to Warsaw, which is one of the shortest trips you can do. And obviously Theresa May and Boris Johnson got to enjoy the fruits of it. So when we spoke to DC on the plane in his check shirt and his black fleece, he was a bit, you're not delighted that he had to take all the all the stick for ordering a vanity plane, if you like, and he only got to fly in it once for less than 3 hours, I think.
Yeah. A politician I interviewed once said to me that politics is all about legacy, and whatever you do now, it's going to take 5 years to come down the track, at least. So there's consultations and white papers and green papers and blah, blah, and then legislation. And then before you can actually have the impact that you want and see the result, it's going to be at least 5 years, if not longer. And the whole point of politics, really, or the whole business of politics, was claiming credit for something your predecessor had done. And so you have to just hope that the person you've replaced did do something so that you can claim credit for it. And in the years to come, the things that you do are something that the people who follow you are going to claim credit for. Unfair, and they're not doing it to help each other out, but that's kind of how it works out in the long run. Yeah. Before we go on to good news, what is anybody going to be able to say is the legacy that Boris Johnson's left for them? Because he's spent lots of money, he's had the pandemic and everything else, but both as Mayor of London, as MP, as Prime Minister, he hasn't set any big things in train that in 5-10 years' time will be producing benefits, unless you think Brexit is going to suddenly start causing money to rain from the sky.
Well, and that the new national flagship, which definitely isn't a replacement for the Royal Yacht Britannia, it's depending on how long he stays, he might get to smash the bottle on that, perhaps, given that the Queen doesn't seem to.
I think they'll let the Queen do that one, won't they? If she gets Britannia version 2.
Palace isn't particularly happy about it, from what we've been told. They're not behind it. Yeah, so they don't want to.
The Queen doesn't want a yacht.
Prince Philip. Well, I think she might not want it. She might not want to be seen to want a yacht when the country's skint perhaps more
Yes.
like it.
Well, yeah, she's often got her finger slightly more firmly on the pulse than whoever's in
Yeah.
Downing Street. It's amazing that someone who lives in a palace. But no, she's quite right. And the Queen doesn't want a yacht. I think actually that might be a scoop, Ben. Might be worth filing that one. Now, if you've got any more questions about whether or not we are going to be lifting restrictions, how things are looking for the pandemic and the 0 deaths rate, whether or not we're worried about Ben actually burning to a crisp under the magnifying glass that he's currently under, because he looks like he's just been going to start steaming.
Try and move a minute.
Then get into the comments and ask us your questions and how you feel about schools and whether they're getting the right amount of funding. But first, there is some good news, and here it is. He's back. This is a story about an abandoned staffy called Roxy. She's 5 years old, dumped, taken in by the RSPCA. She's not the youngest and most sprightly pup. You can see there she's got a bit of a grey muzzle. But the RSPCA spotted that she had some skills and she had some potential. She's been passed out to the police and she's been trained as an explosives sniffer dog. And she even helped in Windsor ahead of the royal wedding of Princess Beatrice, which I think was last year. It was during the pandemic, wasn't it? So, Ben, the question really is here. Now, I know you're not a dog person, but does this not prove that dogs are a man's best friend? Because you're never going to get a cat doing this, are you?
No, so you and I, we slightly disagree on dogs, but one thing we do agree on is that dogs are better than cats. Because although I'm not particularly fond of dogs, I really hate cats. They're very, very bad for my asthma as well, speaking on a personal level. But yeah, this dog, one thing I was fascinated about is, this is a staffy, I believe, Roxy, the 5-year-old. I didn't realise that staffies were actually any good at sniffing stuff. I thought, because when we're in Parliament, we see the sniffer dogs every day. So they send, before the MPs arrive, they send the Cocker Spaniels into the chamber and around the grounds to sniff out any explosives, like Guy Fawkes style. They're always Cocker Spaniels, sometimes Alsatians. They're never staffies. So fair play to Roxy, who's obviously got a talent that most Staffordshire Bull Terriers don't possess, in being able to sniff out Semtex and C4. So yeah, good work by her. And it's good to see that the dog unit at Hampshire and Thames Valley Police, the joint dog unit, are looking outside of the traditional Cocker Spaniel model for their explosive sniffing canines.
That's it. A bit of cultural diversity within the sniffer dog world is to be praised, and also to the RSPCA, who've actually managed to spot the potential for a dog and let her explore her abilities to her fullest. But I will point out something, Ben. Every dog, if you unfold the membrane in your nose with which you smell, right, it's the size of a postage stamp. It's all squished up. You fold it out the size of a postage stamp. You fold out a dog's, it's about the size of a football pitch. Or is it a handkerchief? One of those two. It's bigger anyway, right? So all dogs have the ability to sniff so much more than us. And I think it's to do with the ability to take the training and the ability to everything else. But staffies, although they have a bit of a reputation because there's some of those who've been badly trained, they're very loyal. They're really good family dogs, although not as good as collies like mine is. Anyway, thank you very much, Ben, for joining us and explaining all that to us. Thank you to those who've been in the comments and trying to drown out the nutters. That's much appreciated. And we will see you next week, hopefully, for another edition of the News Agenda. And maybe there'll be even fewer deaths from COVID next week and we'll be a bit of a step further on. Fingers crossed, everyone. Bye-bye. Go and enjoy the sun. Wear your sunblock.